Hello and welcome to CM4D Basic Training. In this module, we will be talking about the CM4D internal data flow and just go over in very general and briefly how a CM4D template would be developed and the flow of information starting with the information in the CM4D database to a completed report. So in the diagram that you see before you, I've kind of laid out what the basic data flow would be within CM4D. In order to get a finished product or a finished report in which you have charts or tables or other objects that report on measured features from a collection device, first you have to access that data from the CM4D database. So we have in this corner the CM4D database, which is separated probably on a different server that has all the information that has been uploaded from Datasmith. So this database would include all the nominals, all the samples, all the routines that would exist for your measured data for the customer or for your system. So in CM4D itself, there's a series of steps that we must perform in order to have a complete report. There are many different types of reports, virtually unlimited number that you could create, varying in style, complexity, and size, but all of them will share this basic data flow. So in CM4D Classic, when you're developing a report, you would first create something called a query. And the query is an object that allows you to contain or hold one or more routines that come from the CM4D database. So once you've made your query and you have at least one routine contained within it, you can then go on to create what are known as data sets. Data sets are smaller groups of points of a certain type that come from the routine data in the query. So you don't need to have multiple data sets, or you can have just one. It depends on, again, how complex the report is and how you are trying to group your information. So with data sets, again, you can have, let's say you have 100 points or 100 features from your routine. You can have a data set contain all 100, or you can have it contain 10 or 20, or a certain type of feature that comes from those from that routine. And it can also contain a certain type of data for those features. So you can have the data set only have or look at X data, Y data, Z data, or any other dimension that has a nominal value or that has been measured by the collection device for those features. So those are the two main things that data sets contain: a certain number of features from your routine and a certain type of data for those features. Of course, there's a lot of other options for data sets, but that's what we'll get into in another video that details data sets and data stacks separately. So once you have your group of features created in the form of one or more data sets, you can also create data stacks. Those will be created based on need, and basically a data stack is just another type of group like a data set. It's a container, but it allows you to perform operations between data sets, or allows you to merge and combine data sets, or perform some sort of math function between two data sets. So it's about manipulating existing information in a previous data set or data stack and coming out with some result. And then that information will be in a data stack. So with data sets and data stacks, they're both containers. In the end, information from both can be connected to what are known as annotations on the white space or on the sheets that you can create within CM4D. So here I have an example of a page using trend charts. You can have a data set that has all the features you want to use to make a report, and then the charts themselves, once those are created, those can be connected to individual rows within the data set or be connected to a particular feature name from a data set. Likewise, you can create objects, whether it's a chart or a benchmark or a table or some other object that also connects to a data set or to a data stack, where you can do things like tallying percentages, creating benchmarks as you see here, a CPK benchmark, or doing some sort of summary table based on the data coming from the data stack. Once that's done and you have actual content to load into the charts, into your summary reports and other pages, you would go about developing the template, creating new charts, new pages, orienting your views, and filling out all the information that needs to exist for that particular report. And in that way, a template is created. Like I said before, there are many variations or different ways that you could organize your data into groups with these data sets and data stacks or with the queries, but in general, this is the basic data flow in order to create a report in CM4D. So to illustrate this data flow, I'm going to create a blank document in CM4D Classic and show you how the different elements connect together in a very basic way in order to illustrate how a report is created, or the data flow to creating a report in CM4D. So to begin with, I'll go here to File and choose New and create a brand new report template. This report template is completely empty, not connecting to any data, and has no predefined style types or anything within it. So the first thing to do in a case like this, if you have a brand new template, as we saw in the illustrated data flow, we need to connect to the CM4D database using something called a query. And we can do that here on this side pane where it says data sources. If you notice, there are 4 tabs here. This first one is known as the data tab. The second one is known as the data set tab. The third one is the sheet set tab. And the fourth is where you can bring in CAD images into the CM4D report. This is known as the image tab. That's one way that you can bring in images. So if we go back to this tab, the first one, this is the data source tab. In order to create a query here, we would need to right click on data sources, choose new, actually we'll choose open managed data source. And really the difference between these two depends on whether the customer is using the enterprise version of CM4D or the standalone. With version 25 and up, chances are, I'd say 99% that they would be using the enterprise version because it needs to have a site and result database. So if that's the case, the databases are managed with something called Site Manager. And when that is applicable, what we can do is choose this Open Managed Data Source option. So if I click on that, it will take you to this window where you can choose what site to connect to and the database belonging at that site. You can have more than one database, of course, but just in this test example, on this test server, we have this one database, V25 test database. So I'll click there, hit OK, and after that, it will open up what's known as the Query Properties dialog window. This is a window that lets you set a few initial settings for the query that we're creating. A lot of these will be explained in another video where we go into detail about the different query options that you have. But for now, what we can do is rename the query label if we want to. It's something generic. And if I hit OK, we're going to have another option here, which will happen once when we're in a new document. This is about choosing routines. So before you can actually go into the database and choose a routine, you have this window that lets you decide what options are available when you're choosing that routine. So we have here things like the site level, data source level, routine label, routine alias, description, and routine filters. So by choosing these, you can tell the system by what criteria you would like to do sorting to look for routines in the database. Typically, I go by site data source level. That allows me to see multiple sites if those are existing at a customer, or see multiple databases and choose between them when looking for different routines. Once you choose some selection parameters, you have over here the ability to choose the type of profile. Right now I have this selected as public, but there could be an option here where you could choose public, and so that fills in. Once that's done, you can hit OK, and then you'll be taken to this page here, or this window. This is where we actually choose the routines that are in the database. Since I'm using a testing database, there are already multiple types of routines or data in that database. What I'm going to do is just choose this particular routine name and hit OK. At this point, I can choose to load all features or choose some sort of filtering for the actual features in the routine. I'll keep with the first option and hit finish. So once I do that, it has loaded the routine into the query. The query is represented by this object here that I called part. The routine name is this here below. Again, there's different options for the query in order to see data, whether clicking on the drop down and choosing individual features, or viewing these features in a grid-like structure underneath here. There's something called a grid where you can view data, but what's relevant here is that we have a routine that's loaded into a query. We'll also explain later about how images can automatically appear in the view here. This is because this image has already been attached to this routine name, and we'll look into options for how to do that later. But right now we have a routine in the query. So again, the next step that comes from the data flow diagram is to create a data set that has one or more points from this routine. So to do that, we would click here on the Dataset tab. Here we have two categories, data sets, data stacks. What we can do is right click on data set and choose the option new data set. This will open up a dataset properties window. Here again we can name this particular data set to whatever we want. I will keep it simple and just call this all points, or you can name it all features. At this point, there's two major options to choose data. There's something called sift rules, which allows you to choose for the points that you're going to load into this data set, what particular SMI type will be active for those points. This is a filtering mechanism. Basically, if you have, say, 10 points that you plan on loading into this data set, some of those points, because of the nominals that we loaded from Datasmith, will fall under particular categories. There will be points that are known as surface, points that are known as hole, points that are known as slot, and other categories. We'll look more into how CM4D automatically places a feature into a particular category, but right now, depending on the categories that exist, you can choose the particular dimensions that will be turned on for that category. So we have here position, normal, XYZ, and then if you have what are known as vectors, which are IJK values, which were mentioned in one of the Datasmith training modules, the software can determine what the primary, secondary, and tertiary vector are, and you can tell it to show only the dimension that is the primary vector or secondary or tertiary. So right now, I will keep the options as they are. I think I'll have some points that fall under surface that have position data, so I should be fine with that. So that's where you choose the data types, but to choose the features that will fall into or be in this container, we would go here to data source, and here in data source on this left hand window pane, you see we have the query that we can connect to. Right now it's known as active, but if we want to be explicit, we can choose the drop down and we'll see the part query that we named. We can choose that, and then where it says feature, we can choose a particular feature here under feature. These are the list of the features that are in that routine in this query. Or we can click on list and then click edit, and we will see here in the right hand column a list of all the features from that particular routine. From this point, if we wanted to, we could pick particular features, whether it's the first 10, or if I hold control, I can pick particular features this way. And if I hit the left arrow button here, it will load those features into the left-hand window pane to let you know that these are selected. So once that's done, you load your features. You can also load what samples you want to see data for those features. So you can load data for the last sample. You can choose a particular sample that is in the query, or you can choose here all samples in query. We'll choose this option, and then we'll hit OK. So once that's done, we have a data set that has particular points that we chose, and it will have data for, I believe, the position dimension for those points. If we wanted to see what that looks like, or what the list within here looks like, we can right click on the data set and choose View Dataset and Grid. And down below, you will have a grid structure, which might be small, like so. You can click on the bar above and drag that up to view the features that are in that data set, and it will show you what the different samples are, the sample values or the deviation values. So we have our features, we have data for our features. In order to get an object to view or report on any of this data, one way to do that is to use these icons above. In this menu options here, we have different icons for different types of objects that we can put on this white space. I'm going to use my mouse button to zoom out a little bit. I'm using my mouse wheel to roll it out in order to get a better view here. So on this sheet set where we can make additional pages, we can put objects on here. There's different types of objects. There's text, there's view. This is a view object that by default appears there when you open a new template. You have chart, table, line, shape, container, picture, and graph. So many different types of objects that you can put onto the white space. I'm going to choose a simple one and go with a chart. So if I click chart and then draw a box, you see that my icon has changed its size. I'm holding down the left mouse button and dragging, and then when I let go, it will create a box of a certain size. This would be a default chart. So this chart right now is not connected to anything or to any data, but based on the illustration that we saw before, we saw that data sets can feed data to objects on the white space like charts. So to connect this, what I would do is right click on the chart, go to properties, and then for each object that can be in the white space, you will have a tab here called data source. This tab is where you can connect the object that you're within to a source of data like a data set or a data stack. So to do that, I clicked on data source and I'm going to go here to data set, and in the drop down I can choose the data set that I created called all features. If I choose that, next it will say, do I want to use all rows? In other words, do I want to try to populate this chart with the data from all the rows in this data set? I don't, because I want one chart to show data for one feature, so I can use this option here, use row 1 of 1. That will make the chart view data from just the first row. If you wanted to increase that, you could say row 1 of 2, and the chart would view 2 rows of data at the same time. But for simplicity's sake, I'll choose this, use row 1 through 1. And the chart will then plot data for these values on row 1. Now if you notice, it looks like there are gaps. That's simply because of the routine that I chose and how the data was loaded within there. You'll probably see interfeature markers or lines connecting all of this data, which is fine. But what we're illustrating here is that now we have a chart looking at data from the first row that's connected to this data set. The data set is connecting to the query, and the query is getting its routine information from the CM4D database. So the chart itself can be populated with other things like variables in order to display what the feature name is, certain statistics, nominal values, and other types of information like that. But in general, what we just illustrated here is basically how information flows. One last thing, if we want this chart to look at the particular feature on the part that it's loading data for, we can right click, go to properties, and then next to data source there's a tab called leader. Here we can choose use data source feature and then tell it which view on the page we want this chart to point to. So there's only one view, it has that name view 1. If I do that and then hit OK, this leader line will now point to the feature marker that is the location for the data displayed in this chart. At that point, we can always create more charts. There's easy ways to do that, such as holding control, dragging a chart, and then letting go. That will increment or create a new chart that's looking at the second row from the location of the first chart. And we could do that over and over or use other methods in order to populate the report with the charts that are needed to display the data. But in general, again, we were here just to illustrate what the basic data flow is within CM4D in order to create a report or get information on the white space. So with that, we'll end this module, and hopefully the information is informative, and we will go on to the next in more detail, looking at the different objects in CM4D, how to manipulate the information within the software, and we will be seeing you soon.